what I wanted to do was welcome our speaker, lunchtime speaker, Bill Mosier, who has been a friend for about 8 or 9 years now, something like that. 10? 10 years. And Bill is the Senior Managing Director of the Trammell Crow Company. He's the CEO of the Denver Convention Center Hotel Authority. He's an expert in planning and developing and managing real estate in the metro area as well as throughout the state and other places. He's a past president of the Downtown Denver Partnership, and he holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Arizona. He was the owner's representative, or Trammell Crow was the owner's representative for the Denver Union Station Project Authority Board, and I served on that while I was a member of the RTD Board. So that's how we really developed our friendship, and it's been a very collegial activity over the last, until I left RTD Board. So I want to welcome him, and he will be discussing the redevelopment of Denver Union Station and the land around Denver Union Station, which I think you will find very interesting. He spoke at this event a year ago and was so well received. We're having it taped. It will be on Channel 8 in the future, which will really be a big advantage. So you have a great resume, and I welcome you and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Ken.
Well, first off, just congratulations to all of you doing what you're doing, putting in the time to do this. I actually did what you did back in Tucson, Arizona. I participated in a Tucson Leadership Academy as a 20-something, so a long time ago. And it was really valuable, and I've always appreciated that these sorts of academies, that Susan and Pat and others that set this up so many years ago have managed to keep thriving and help educate citizenry about our issues as a growing metro area. And this is such a unique place we're in and such a unique time, although I think every time is unique overall. But there's always the same sort of challenges about growth, about mobility, about land use, about the spirit of who we are, and really in the final analysis, all this is about placemaking, whether we're placemaking in Littleton, placemaking in Denver, placemaking in Colorado. It's all about making places where we all can grow and have opportunity and have a lifestyle that we appreciate and raise families, et cetera, and grow businesses. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and I commend all of you for taking the time to do this, and really commend the people that organized this for putting such a great program together. I'm going to give you a quick overview of just my background so you know where I'm coming from on some of this, because part of my message to you is, and I'm going to quote, Jennifer Moulton was a very, very close friend of mine. She was the city planning director in Denver, and when I first met her, she ran Historic Denver, and I was a developer, and so we always had our different issues, but she became a dear friend, and I learned a lot from her. But the one thing she always said is cities are messy places. And what I would say is, in some ways, you can get too messy, but it is always a little bit messy. And part of the messiness is that there's people that are coming in and out of this process all the time. And to a certain extent, I really believe that getting people active and having them participate and learn and be knowledgeable, but be active in the participation, and it really ends up developing a little bit of a collaborative effort, believe it or not, for the long term. And I'll tell you a little bit about the Denver Union Station story, but I think it's most every story is that it's a messy process. It's not simple. You have to backtrack. New people come in who haven't even been participating for things and blow things up, and you got to start over and all that sort of thing. But I think if people have an end in mind and they have a love of their place in mind, that generally you can be successful. And what I would say from my experience, and I've traveled to a lot of cities and done a lot of consulting with cities, because I spent the first half of my career running downtown organizations. We are so fortunate here in Denver. And I would say for three reasons. One is we have that Western spirit. We're kind of pioneers, and we just have, you know, we all have a chance to make an impact on our community. It doesn't really matter what our last name is for the most part. You don't have to be a fourth generation to make an impact. Secondly, we're such a young city that we don't have a lot of tradition. There isn't a lot that we have to adhere to in some ways, and that's both good and bad. And one of the reasons we have to cling to our past in such a strong way is to protect that. And the third thing is, I think that breeds entrepreneurialism. We're a very entrepreneurial community. And then the last thing, which I think is a huge differentiator, and I would say it's the number one differentiator in many cases in the metro areas I've worked in, is that we're so isolated that we have to invent ourselves. And just think of what we've done. We bought the railroads. The railroads weren't coming here. They were going to Cheyenne. There was no reason for them to come to Denver. We bought the railroads, so we came to Denver. We made this place happen. We bought an airport. You know, we bought one of the world's great airports, made our place, and we have made sports teams happen. We have made convention centers happen. We have made transportation and Denver Union Station happen. We really have been forced to create place because we can't turn to anybody else, and there's no big brother next to us that's running the show. And if you think about it, we're one of the very few metro areas in the country, and I really can't think of many others that are in our situation where you have to go 600 miles to find more than, 300,000 people. I mean, Salt Lake, Albuquerque, Omaha, Phoenix would probably be our closest metro area. And so I think that isolationism and the nature of how our metro area is located in the landscape of the United States has forced us to be collaborative and forced us to be regional. And we get lots of folks that come into Denver to study Denver. One of the first things I say is, you can't be San Diego and try and figure out how to do regional things like we do, because you've got too many players. It's too big. Where do you draw the boundary? The whole notion of RTD, for instance, that Kent served on the board, being a 7-county taxing district, the 7 counties was basically all we had. That was what, 3/5 or more of this population of the state of Colorado. And in fact, the 7-county area is probably more than half of the population of Wyoming, New Mexico, the whole surrounding 500-mile radius. And so that really makes it not easy for us to do, but it's a very unique situation where we can respond to our circumstance. So a lot of the story that I'm going to tell about Denver Union Station is partially a story about why our region has been successful, and I think we need to be humble about it. And when other cities come to us, one of the first things I say is, we're not San Francisco or Oakland or someplace in New Jersey or someplace in Chicago trying to carve out a place. We're just us, and so we just do it our way, and we do it the best we can, and we move on. And that's both our great, check mark for being a great city, and it's also like, what else were we supposed to do, right? So I preface that. The second thing is, from my background, just so you know, I'm a native of Colorado. My father came here for the ski troops in World War II. So I was born at St. Joe's Hospital here in Denver and brought up in Jefferson County schools up in what's now Wheat Ridge. I like to say that I'm so old that it actually was unincorporated Jefferson County, and now it's Wheat Ridge. I remember one time when I went skiing and I was driving out I-70 and they had a sign to Wheat Ridge, and I thought, what's a sign for Wheat Ridge? Like, I've never heard of Wheat Ridge. And it was where I grew up. But my dad was transferred to New Mexico, and when I was in the 6th grade, so I grew up in Santa Fe, and both junior high and high school, having a formative education, being a teenager, I can't even think of a city would have a bigger influence on me from a multicultural perspective. And just dealing with sort of the messiness of multiculturalism in that sense. Went to college in Oregon, was a history major. Like, seriously? What are you supposed to do as a history major? So I traveled a little bit, and when I figured out that I could get my $2.75-hour job at Fred Meyer working in the paint department, my mother was aghast. You went to college to become a paint salesperson. But Fred Meyer was a regional retail outlet, and I was up in Portland, Oregon, and moved to 5 different cities in like 18 months in a job training program, in a management training program. but I had to do an internship. And fortunately, just because of my schedule, I ended up doing an internship with the vice president of real estate for Fred Meyer. And the only thing I did was drive from Portland to Salem, which back in the day was an hour and a half, and there were no cell phones, and so you actually had to talk to the person that you were with. And I went to 2 or 3 public hearings to rezone property on I-5 for a regional shopping center. And to tell you how sick I am as a human being, I loved it. I thought, holy smokes, is this cool? I mean, these neighborhood meetings were cantankerous, and people were proposing this and that, and this was the, you know, there was all kinds of give and take, and you know, architects and contractors and planners and lawyers and financial people, and I thought, what a cool thing. So I bagged law school, which I'm really glad I did, and like Kent, I ended up getting a master's degree in urban and regional planning down at the University of Arizona. And when I got out, I became the director of the Downtown Development Corporation, which was a public-private entity involved in urban renewal, and went into my urban renewal phase, which I was in for 20 years. Came back to Denver in 1990 to run the Downtown Denver Partnership for 10 years, which is sort of how I got into this. But my love was always real estate and real estate development, and so then I formed my own company, became a real estate developer, small scale, and then joined Trammell Crow, got a little bigger scale, and that's what I do. And Susan was asking me if I was retired, and I said, I don't know if I'll retire, because my hobby is my job, is my life, and I just have always done this, and it's kind of a weird deal where it's just what I like to do. So I say that because I may not be your normal speaker from a development standpoint, because I'm one of those people who actually thinks that this milieu of participation from citizens and professionals and elected officials, and the process of creating vision and creating place and implementing that vision is a really fun, challenging, interesting, rewarding place to be. So that's just by way of giving you some perspective on what's going on. So the coolest project I've ever been involved in my career was Denver Union Station. And back in, and I'll talk about some of that history, but back in the 90s when I was at the partnership, we put the initial plan together working with the city for what was going to happen to the Central Platte Valley. And I'll talk about that time frame. But one of the things that happened is I was on the road, you know, with Kent and everybody else when the plans were being put together for Denver Union Station. I probably attended over 100 neighborhood meetings during that time period. We had all sorts of participation efforts and various meetings and all that sort of thing. And then when Denver Union Station happened, everybody was like, wow, what a cool project, Denver Union Station. I mean, that was easy. That was done. And I realized that I had to change the pitch on Denver Union Station. So this is sort of the pitch since it got completed. And this is not an overnight sensation. Most things that are really important are not overnight sensations. They take a long, long time and a lot of people. So I call this a 30-year story and counting, because it's still underway. But that takes you back to the mid-'80s, just to give you an idea. And these are the 5 things that I most want you to take back with you. One is never underestimate civic and political will. Without civic and political will, things will not get done. And it's the Susan Thorntons of the world, for instance, as a one-time mayor of Thornton, it's the people who are in positions of power, who understand a vision, and who say, we have a will to get this done, and we're going to keep moving this forward, and we'll tweak and we'll change and we'll accommodate, but at some point you got to keep your eye on the prize. And what I mean by civic and political will is that one of the unique things about Denver and about Colorado is we're not just run by the private sector, and we're not just run by the public sector, but there's a real coming together. So I think it's very unique that in the cities I've visited to see this civic and political. What I would call civic is nonprofit, business interests, community interests, affordable housing interests, historic interests, citizen neighborhood interests, but those civic kind of bodies that are not really private and they're not really the public or the political. And then the political side, from city councils on up to governors and even the U.S. government. Big vision with persistence. And I'm going to talk about big vision here in a minute, but having a big vision is really helpful. It keeps your eye out on what you're trying to do. And a big vision can be a fairly simple vision. It doesn't have to be a downtown. It doesn't have to be land use oriented. It can be, there's all kinds of visions that go with everything that we do every day. But having a fairly bold vision that is inclusive of a lot of issues is actually not that hard to have, and it helps keep you on the right track as you move forward. But in any event, without persistence, you're going to fail, because if you think something's going to happen in a short-term time frame, and if you think you're the only person that's going to influence that, you're not going to make it. The persistence part of it also is understanding that it's persistence on the part of a whole bunch of people, and it's very rarely any single person that shepherds these things through. Three, key to Denver, in my view, is that we have really used public investment to stimulate private investment. And I think, one of the number one things in my role back in my urban renewal days was always, why would you spend public money if it doesn't get a huge return on private investment? And that's one of the things that we lose sight of sometimes, but any public investment should create benefit overall to improve the tax base, improve mobility, improve education. And, it doesn't have to be return on investment in a financial way, but there has to be a return on investment that ties back to your vision. But I think that we have done an amazing job of that. And one of the things you'll see about the Denver Union Station story is that the Denver Union Station project literally create billions of dollars of private investment that improve the tax base. Placemaking, that's what this is all about. Design is important, architecture is important, land use planning is important, landscape architecture is important, placemaking is really important. And that goes to the neighborhood park, it's schools, it's retail, it's whatever it is, it's how do you create place. What is place? Place is basically a place that person want to be in, that they enjoy being, they feel safe. It's something they want to bring friends to. They can walk to it. They can walk through it. So a place is, believe it or not, where human beings gather together. And it's something that no matter what happens in the social media world, we're always going to be wanting to gather together, in my opinion. And then lastly, just has to do with public process. And this is key. Transparent, accountable, and inclusive. And that runs the gamut of time. One of the challenges on big projects is that the inclusivity, the people that actually start it and are working through it become exclusive in their own right, even though, like, somebody will come in from the outside who just moved into town and they start chiming in. And even the people who support them in their position are like, well, you're new, we're not going to listen to you. And one of the things that you always have to take a deep breath on these processes, particularly in a city like the metro area of Denver, where there's so many new residents, is you'd say, how long have you lived here? And they go, 2 weeks. You go, okay, you're in. We appreciate your input. We'd love to sit down with you and explain what's been going on, but you try to be inclusive, and that means the people that start at the beginning as well as the people that come in at the end. And then obviously transparency and accountability when it comes to using public dollars is important. And in the case of Denver Union Station, we had the Regional Council of Governments, you heard from Dr. Cog a minute ago. We had the City and County of Denver. We had the Regional Transportation District. We had the CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation. We had all kinds of funds that I'll show you from the federal government. The transparency part of this was ridiculously carried out because we had to be accountable for all these different funding sources. And so you just kind of laid it all out there for everybody. And if this funding source wanted X, then somebody else, if they wanted Y, had to figure out how to pay for Y. And so that transparency and accountability really mattered. So above all, those 5 things, pretty much you follow those, you can get most anywhere on most anything. So just by way of background, you all know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but Fast Track's passed. And when it passed in 2004, it really created a hub and spoke system, and Denver, the city and county of the downtown Denver, was the hub. Not necessarily Denver Union Station at the time. It was viewed that it would probably be Denver Union Station, but Denver was the hub. Well, you can imagine when this thing passed, Denver was like, oh no, what happened here? we got to figure this out. And so the story in recent times began then. But let me take you back. This is the rail yards of Denver, and so for people who haven't lived here for a long time, this is only 30 years ago. This is a view of our city in the mid-'80s. And on the right is downtown, and in fact, I think this is Denver Union Station right here. Coors Field, right there. Elitch's down here. So I-25, there's the river. That's the Platte River. I-25 is over here. No, Elitch's was not there then. No, none of this was there. So this was 300 acres of rail yards owned by 5 different rail companies. And I think there were 35, you'd see all these tracks? I think there were 35 or 37 tracks in 1986. Pretty remarkable, really, when you think about it, not very long ago. So back in the late 80s, Mayor Pena is the one who got it started and said, gee, we have these rail yards that are kind of not being highly used and are making, you know, we had all kinds of environmental issues and just trains and all that sort of thing going through the area. And our downtown has this as a neighbor, and it's impeding downtown's growth, it's impeding the city's growth. Obviously, one of the things that's key still today, and my transit friends don't always like me to say this, but I-25 and I-70 are and will be for a long time very important to this community. And if you could think of I-25 as a gateway to downtown, that would be great for downtown, right? I mean, anybody would want I-25 as a gateway to their city. Well, that gateway wasn't very well used and certainly wasn't very attractive. So there became pressure to get those rail yards and convert them to downtown. So there are 3 things that I've identified here, and there's lots of things that Mayor Pena gets credit for. But one of them is he got with the railroads and he got them to commit to what is called the new CML, which is the Consolidated Main Line. So the railroads agreed that all the freight chains that come through Denver would be consolidated in that area to a fairly narrow right-of-way with multiple tracks, and the trains would all go through there. And the maintenance yards would go north and south to existing areas that already existed, like the Burnham yards to the south and the UP yards are just to the north of downtown. Those still exist. So they basically started clearing out that whole area of maintenance facilities and all that sort of thing. The second thing is that as part of a bond issue, the city decided to tear down the 16th Street Viaduct. Frankly, they kind of tore it down before it fell down. But and then through a bond issue, they built a new 15th Street that created an underpass under the new CML so that 15th Street went back and forth through Highlands. Now, nobody at the time ever thought, including Mayor Pena or me or anybody else, thought that that road was going to create what's happened in Highlands. But that road now has connected Highlands and downtown in a way that nobody ever thought would happen. But the biggest thing is created the LoDo Historic District, Lower Downtown Historic District. In the late 80s when that happened, 40%, this is an amazing statistic, 40% of Lower Downtown, 18 blocks, was vacant. 40% of all the buildings were 100% vacant. 40% of all the properties in Lower Downtown were bank owned. So coming out of the 80s recession, I mean, you know, and then you come in and you layer on with all these buildings that are owned by banks, which is probably the only reason it passed, and old buildings that are 100% vacant. You got to keep those buildings, you can't tear them down, and where there's vacant land, you can only build to 185 feet. Boom, done. No lawsuits, lots of anger. It took a couple of years and blah, 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 but it's pretty amazing. I mean, you couldn't do that today. There's no way you could do that today. But that preserved Lower Downtown and started to turn that around. So those moves right there created a whole new landscape in 1988. So then in the 1990s, between Mayor Pena and then Mayor Webb, came kind of the next generation of improvements. Well, Mayor Webb was really focused on parks. He was a real open space guy, and probably his legacy when push comes to shove 20 years ago will be more for parks than most anything else. But he's the one that, he got an attorney named Ken Salazar, happened to be a senator and, a secretary and all that sort of thing. At the time, he was an attorney, to chair the South Platte River Commission. And the South Platte River Commission started working with Denver Water and Urban Drainage and others and said, let's clean up the river and let's make the river an asset. And then the mayor went in and bought properties along the river for parks. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And then in one of his bond issues, he created Wewata. And for the first time, there was a north-south street that went through the Platte Valley. So now you have 15th Street, you had Wewata, and now you're cleaning up the river. So that became part of the foundation of that. And lo and behold, what happens in the early 90s is the Major League Baseball decides to locate a baseball team here. We decide to build Coors Field. The big controversy was, where do you build Coors Field? Many proponents argued for where Mile High Stadium is today, argued where Elitch's is today. The downtown community argued for an in-town stadium that was on two sides, had cars, streets. And then on this side had a railroad track, so there was only parking up here. I was actually on a radio show with one of the radio folks, and he was just aghast that we were putting a stadium here with only 3,000 parking spaces going to the north of the stadium. But this made a huge difference and really sparked a lot of the reinvestment in lower downtown. But what I want to talk about for a minute is Commons Park. Mayor Webb bought Commons Park. City money, actually used proceeds from the Winter Park ski resort lease, and used that money to buy that land. The headlines in the paper were, city buying parkland, no houses within 1,000 feet or something like that. There literally was nobody that lived anywhere here. So the city had this land, and then they started developing the plans for a park. They're going to just put a park in. So in the downtown community, we were in the meantime putting a plan together, and the downtown community, particularly the business community, was scared to death that the Platte Valley in 50 years would become a new downtown with big high-rise office buildings and all that sort of thing, and that the main downtown would be left behind. So the planning effort here, which took easily 5 to 7 years, was a PUD, a planned unit development, and lots of conversation. But we ended up doing two really unique things. You had to build a minimum of 2,000 housing units. So any developer, just think about that as a reverse zoning requirement. Any developer who came in had to prove that with the density and the height allowances on all the vacant property that was left, that there was enough land left to build the housing. The other developers or the other landowners who own vacant land are sitting there going, well, if I get left behind here, I'm going to be the one stuck with housing. And so, there was this total change in how the private sector would look at housing development. So you had to have a minimum of 2,000 housing units. Then there was a height limit put on, which was much higher than lower downtown, but much lower than downtown. And then the third thing is there was a limit, and I should know this number. I think 2 million is what's sticking in my mind, of about 2 million square feet of commercial. So there were height limits, commercial development limits, and then you can build as much housing as you want within the height limits, but you could not build, at the end of the day, could not be less than 2,000 housing units. So what we all were worried about was Denver Union Station, because what we thought would happen is that Lodo would grow to the west, grow towards the river, and it would grow from downtown and just sort of randomly but rationally march towards the river. And so saving Denver Union Station was a big deal, and so the saving of Denver Union Station back in the 90s became the issue, and so nobody wanted to do anything that would at all sacrifice Denver Union Station. It was owned by the railroads and a private developer, so it was a complicated ownership structure. So both to their chagrin and their pleasure, they didn't know which on a given day, they were not included in any of the planning. We just basically didn't know what to do. We obviously didn't know Fast Tracks was coming. We'd never heard of light rail. But we just said, we're not touching Denver Union Station. We'll just figure it out later. And so they were never part of lower downtown, not really ever part of the plan. We just said it's always going to be here. It and the state capitol were two of the most important buildings in Colorado in our view. We don't know what the heck we're going to do with it, so we're just going to say it's here, leave it alone, we'll deal with it later. So what happened is all those nice plans didn't happen. What happened? East-West Partners from Vail bought all of this land along the park that the city invested $10 million in with no housing units, no residents nearby. They bought it, and literally in a matter of 4 or 5 years, over 2,000 housing units, mostly condominiums, were built on this park. And that's Riverfront Park today. And all this land remained vacant and totally jumped over the land and went right to the river and right to the park, and all these housing units happened. I mean, it's remarkable, and nobody ever anticipated that. I can assure you, because I was there, there was nobody that said, oh, of course, that's what's going to happen. So this becomes the early 2000s when housing is under construction. We were involved in office buildings here, and oddly enough, this property right here became DeVita's headquarters. This is 1900, so we were doing office buildings. East West was doing this. The city came along with CDOT and others, and when we tore down the 16th Street Viaduct, there was now no connection to Low-High, to Lower Highlands from downtown. Nobody wanted a car, so we built a Platte River Bridge, which is a bike and pedestrian bridge, which now is, or a river bridge, which then connects over the I-25 to a bridge over the freeway. So you can now go from Highlands over the freeway, over the river, over the railroad tracks on 3 different bridges. And that's like Grand Central Station in the mornings. I mean, between 8 and 9, there are literally hundreds of bikers and pedestrians going into downtown and using the 16th Street Mall. EPA built a building here, but again, the core of this area stayed vacant, and Denver Union Station just stayed as it was, and RTD came in and bought Denver Union Station along with the city and CDOT. And as part of that, they got the parking lots around here, and they got this land right here, because Denver Union Station was all of that. Now, one of the more remarkable stories is that Guide the Ride, the earlier one that lost in the 90s, and then Fast Tracks that passed in the 2000s, did not include bus. There was no money for bus facility. So Market Street Station, for any of you who know, is up the street. And so when Fast Tracks passed, it was like, well, we're going to have a train facility at Denver Union Station, we're going to have a bus facility here. How do we get these together? And that was not RTD's problem. It became the city's problem. And so we tried to figure out a way to make that happen and to figure out a way to finance it. But I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit in that this land here is basically, through the middle of that, is the old alignment from the 1880s of 17th Street. So 17th Street, when the city platted it, went all the way through downtown, went hopscotched over Denver Union Station, and then the right-of-way continued on to the river. Nobody knew that. So when we started looking at Denver Union Station, we realized the railroads didn't own that land, and the people that bought land from the railroads never owned 17th Street. So 17th Street was publicly owned. Fast forward today, the entire underground bus station that replaced Market Street Station is within public right-of-way on city land, and we didn't have to buy any land to do that station. Just kind of one of the things I joke with cities about, and I serve on the Board of Governors of Colorado State University, which is a land-grant institution. So we got all our land during the Morrill Act when Abraham Lincoln was president. And I'm constantly like, don't ever give up your land except for the best of purposes. If you're a municipality, you never know when you might need it again. So this is what we were charged with, we, the Denver Union Station Project Authority. 8 tracks of commuter rail, 3 tracks of light rail, build a 22-bay regional bus facility to replace Market Street Station, and by the way, we have no money for it, so go figure that out. Extend the 16th Street Mall, and then make sure you accommodate the free metro ride on 18th and 19th. So this is what Kent and I and others were charged with back right before the recession, so 2006, 2007, when we had to do this plan. So quickly, a minute, and this is pretty unique to Denver in particular, but Denver and the various mayors of Denver have always felt like they needed to have a partnership with the private sector, and so they've been very reluctant on certain kinds of projects to, as has the state, to take those things on by themselves. So the Metro Stadium District, exists to build the baseball and football stadium, private sector members. The Convention Center Hotel Authority, which built the Hyatt downtown to support the convention center, was a private authority with private board members appointed by the mayor. You can carry it to SCFD, you can carry it to urban drainage. There's a variety of models that we have, but it's very effective because you can bring the private sector as volunteers to help oversee activities, and it depoliticizes and it helps on the politics of getting things through. So the mayor and the governor all got on the same page along with RTD, and there was a decision to create the Denver Union Station Project Authority. So this project authority, and this is a little hard to read on this, but it includes the federal government, which funds DRCOG and CDOT, RTD, which got their money regionally through the sales tax, a metro district, which is unique to Colorado but allows property owners to be taxed to pay for public improvements. We had two partners in East, West, and Continuum who were the successful ones. They actually teamed up. I was on a team. We came in second, so we didn't get it, but they got to buy the extra RTD land. And then DUSPA was created, and then we were hired by DUSPA to kind of be their staff. So DUSPA has no staff. But DUSPA was a DRCOG member, a CDOT member, 2 members of RTD, I can't even read that, 6 members of the city and county of Denver, and one of those was city person, and 5 of them were private sector people appointed by the mayor, and then a metro district member. And so that became the project authority. And then through that, we hired contractors, architects, and all that sort of thing to drive on. So the basic concept originally was to build a train station behind Denver Union Station, have Market Street Station 4 blocks away, and that was what we were going to do. The problem is that getting the trains in and out of Denver Union Station, and particularly to the south line that goes to Mineral, where you all are, you couldn't get them from Denver Union Station because there's no tracks that go south except in the consolidated main line. So this consolidated main line, Mayor Pena didn't even know what he did, obviously, but the right-of-way was created large enough that there could be additional tracks put in. So RTD worked with the railroads and they put in the additional tracks. So now we've got the freight trains and light rail all in the same right-of-way up here. So these lines over here are all the light rail going west and southeast. These lines against Denver Union Station are commuter rail that go to, or someday will go to, the west and the north, Golden and north, and currently go to DIA. One of the things that happened over time then is the city said, we'll figure out a way to pay for a new bus facility and we'll bring all those together. And then it was like, aha, we'll have the bus facility put it underground under 17th Street, have it be the bridge, and essentially you have a 2-block transit station, or what I like to call as a transit district. And then as part of this placemaking, one of the things that we decided to do was make it totally open, so that you could come at it from every which way, that people could come. There's innumerable different ways to get into the transit station, and that was part of the placemaking activity, was to make it accessible and pedestrian. And so this became the plan. In the early days, that plan cost about $650 million. We didn't have the money. So it was viewed that we could probably finance somewhere around $500 million and figure that out. So we all started working on a $500 million financing plan. There's a horrible thing that happened, and I'll tell you the story, also a great thing that happened, and that is the Great Recession. The horrible part of the Great Recession is right when we're starting to get going, the recession happened. And we were going to finance this with bonds. The bond markets fell apart. And we had cash through RTD and other places. I think, if I remember, Ken, it was probably $40 million or so. We were actually starting, going back, the first thing we had to do was start to dig this hole so we could get the bus station in, so that we could put the tracks over the top and connect all of these. So we started digging. start digging holes. So, you spend $40 million, you can dig a big hole. So we had a big hole in the ground going west from Denver Union Station on. And literally, I don't know if you all remember, but during the ARA days, the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, money was available and they wanted to be shovel ready. And we said, how about shovel like really ready, like digging right now? So we got the eye of the federal government to come in and help finance, and this was the plan we put together. And the big one is this regional bus. The light rail was essentially paid for through the sales tax. The passenger rail was essentially paid for through the sales tax, although some of this includes Amtrak, so we had some issues there. There were a lot of street and public spaces that had to be done because, again, we're creating this district and we're trying to weave this transit district back into the community and create a grid system that extended downtown. So a lot of money was spent there, so that was kind of a city expense. And so we had to start kind of whipping away on how we're going to raise $480 million. So essentially, this became the list of funding. And these are all primarily federal funds, state funds, and RTD funds. So these are all government funds. The CPV district was the Metro district, which raised a little money. So we got $145 million. That's a lot of money till you need $50 million, then it's not so much money. So we also had the sale of the parking lots. We had some extra money from RTD. We got some measly $300,000 from Amtrak, who got a sweet deal in this deal, and a variety of other things. And so we ended up with about $180 million of cash and $300 million that was going to be the bond issue that we couldn't float bonds for. So we went to the federal government and we negotiated two different loans, the TIFIA loan and the RIF loan. And this is, let me see, this is the Transportation Infrastructure Financing Something Act. And this is the Railroad Infrastructure Financing, and they're loan programs. The federal government loans money, and they had billions of dollars in these funds, and basically nobody had really drawn them down, and nobody had ever drawn both of them down in partnership. So it took us over a year, but we managed to develop financing programs with both those entities and came up with two loans of $300 million. And so the question is, how do you repay that? Well, the RTD portion gets paid partially through the bonds, future bonds. The monies that I pointed out from RTD were already in the coffer. So this is future revenues. So the city created a tax increment district. But the tax increment district was the whole thing from 20th to 15th, from Wynkoop to the river, or not to the river, to the railroad tracks. And that became a tax increment district. But instead of benefiting a private developer, it basically was a way for the city to capture the funds before it went into the general fund and pay off the loans. So remember that fact, because that was a big deal. That's essentially how and that was primarily the TIFIA that did that. This is primarily how the bus station got financed. And then lastly, there was more money that came in through the Metro district. So the end of the story, well, I'll keep going. So I'm going to come to the end of the story on how that financing got paid off. But in the meantime, this is the transportation area up against the light rail. This is one of my favorite pictures because in our monthly neighborhood meetings, where I would come and present the latest in our design, these were the vents from the underground bus facility. And they were smokestacks and they were concrete. And they came to us. I mean, I presented it in a neighborhood meeting and everybody's like, seriously? Those are like, seriously, you're going to put those in a plaza in the back of Denver, up against the light rail? And we were like, well, okay. So we asked our architects to come up with something, and so they tilted them. We made them out of a different material. They were designed kind of like a tree. You had to have, there's actually venting through here. And then we lit it, and it became sculpture. And literally within the first week that we actually were open, there was I should put this in there because we've got the picture. There was a wedding couple, had their picture taken in front of it. So you're like, okay, I don't think they realized that it's venting the bus exhaust. But these planters and this plaza are all built on top of the mechanical system that vents the bus facility. So this became a public plaza. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us what the thinking was behind the renovation of the actual station? That it was at zero on that.
Yes.
That you
Thank you for pointing that out. So I'm going to come back to that because right here, and I thank you for pointing that out, Denver Union Station renovation, first of all, I think the first number we had in there was 20 million, then it was 40 million, then there was no money to pay for it, and then we realized that if you've got a range of 20 to 40 million, you basically don't know what the cost is, so we made it zero, and we just said we'll figure that out. And so thank you for bringing that up, and I'll come back to that. Because it actually happened because the placemaking for this was so successful that it then took place. So one of the things was that all the bus facilities, we wanted to be light and airy and glass and to be the opposite of Market Street Station. So this is just a view. And all along 17th Street, you can see Denver Union Station. No matter where you're at, you can see Denver Union Station. So if you're lost, you always know where you can go. And there are numerous places you can go down. These are escalators going down into the bus facility. And then my favorite story about this is that we ended up with in public meetings, and nobody wanted a train station. They basically said, we got a train station, we don't want a train station. And they said, no, we want it open air. This is Denver, it's open air. When it snows, it snows. So we ended up doing a canopy like DIA. It's all open on the side, and they now call it a saddle. We actually didn't design it as a saddle, but it's a saddle because we're Denver, I guess. But from Lohi, you have to be able to see the bottom of the window sills of the upper story of Denver Union Station. So the height in the middle of the station is below the bottom of the top floor windows. And then when you get past those windows, it pops up. It actually is not symmetrical. If you look at it from one end, it's actually longer on the south than it is on the left. And it's because we were just designing to what it said. And so now it's become this big architectural feature called a saddle that isn't even symmetrical. And everybody loves the fact that it's not symmetrical. And we were all like, oh, it's not symmetrical. And they were, oh, you think it's a saddle? Okay. And then we built, again, with the view towards how do we get people going wherever they want to go. So we built this pedestrian bridge going across the north side of the station. And again, you can drop down in the middle of the tracks, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a view of it. And those windows, that sill right there, and I'm developing an office building on Platt Street, just looking at Denver Union Station. And when you stand in our office building, you can see those windows from the sill up. You can see the station from the sill up. It's pretty remarkable. But that created the short saddle and the longer saddle on the north side. And then all these canopies got designed to mimic that, which really is intended to mimic DIA. So Skidmore, Owens, Merrill, SOM was the architect for this, and they were brilliant. But it really came. This was a pretty simple case of citizen input on design. Don't build something enclosed. Don't build it open air. Make it simple. Let us look at Denver Union Station. We want to see the mountains. We want to see the buildings, and that's how it got designed. And so it actually saved us some money because we didn't have to heat or cool it. So Denver Union Station, and I'll conclude. This is the last slide, I think. A couple of things about Denver Union Station, and this is the good part of a recession. When we got into the recession, not only did we get the funding from the federal government because we were all in a recession and we were putting people to work, but the great part of it is that we got great pricing because we were putting companies to work. One of the things that is most remarkable about Denver Union Station is that while RTD and the city had streets and roads and bus facilities they wanted to do, we all also focused on placemaking. And the importance of placemaking is creating pedestrian place where people have access. And so the plaza was really important, no parking. So we wanted to get rid of all the parking. This was pavement right up to the walls. And the original plans called for this to be a concrete plaza. And we went to Cold Springs, Minnesota with our contractor and went to a quarry that was shut down. Literally shut down. There was abandoned equipment, no employees except for the 3 or 4 people that owned the place. And we said, we want to know what we can buy granite for. And they said, well, we have no place to store it. We can't hire a lot of people. We could just put 1 crew on it. So they put 1 crew on. We ordered it like 2.5 years in advance. They put it on a truck, and we leased property to store the granite because they had no way to store the granite. And we brought all the granite down, and today it would probably be 3 times as much money to build that plaza. The other thing that we did is this fountain is a multi-million-dollar fountain. People wanted a fountain, but they didn't want a fountain because we don't maintain fountains. And so we wanted to have a fountain that was flat, that you could drain, that would, when you turned it off, it would not just have sitting water in it, so it looked like not very good. And that's what we did. And so this fountain got built. Those things, along with the trees and the no parking, created this European plaza that is now really the defining characteristic of this area. And that's the importance of the placemaking. And you tie that in with connecting the 2 train facilities with the underground bus facility, and tie that in with all the pedestrian sidewalks, bridges, ways to come in from the north, the south, the east, the west. And all of a sudden you created this place, and you ended up with a grid system that is this. And so we built, as part of Denver Union Station project, built that street, built this street, built these streets, and you've got blocks that match a downtown. And this is a map of the entire Central Platte Valley built out 10 years later. 10 years later. The federal government rejected our initial loan because they said there was no way that this would be developed. And so they made us break this into 2 10-year increments. So I'm going to go back one slide. This is the feasibility study that we ended up with. 2009 to 2019, the market study, this is during the recession, and this is how we assured the federal government that the city would be able to pay the federal government back. 873 max of commercial. We're at 2.3 million square feet. No hotels, wouldn't happen. We'll be at over 600 rooms when this project gets built. Residential, somewhere between 1,500 and 1,900. We'll be at almost 3,000. The first column here is what's under construction or under design, and these are already built, so you add those 2 together. Remarkable story, literally in 10 years. The result, down at the bottom, the taxes received by the city as of 2016 were more than double the 2009 forecast. The city has paid off part of its loan, RTD's paid part of its loan, they've refinanced both the loans so that they're much lower, and life is going on paying off the bus facility. And that's how Denver Union Station occurred. And down here, approaching when these other projects get built, will be over $2 billion in private investment in those 15 blocks, all because of a transit station and the investment in the transit station. So with that, anybody have any questions? So thank you all very much. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Carry all the lessons you're learning over these various programs forward. An educated citizenry and a participating citizenry will make this a much better place, I guarantee you. So thanks for what you're doing. Appreciate it.